My friend Ruslan sent me a recent clip of Joe Rogan talking about Christianity, and he wanted to get my thoughts on a specific part of it. But when I watched the full clip, I just knew that I had to make a video discussing it. So let's take a look.
I feel like
There's
you
so many
wouldn't do
interesting
Jesus.
people.
You wouldn't have Jesus.
Well, what if you found out that Jesus wasn't even real? They say, I'll have Jesus in the podcast, and then you got him. There it is. There's
do you
Jesus.
ever read like the accounts of Jesus where there was like 20 other people in that 30-year span claiming they were Jesus? Like he was just one of many people at that time. They think like, you know, Christianity or the Bible just picked one.
It's possible.
Okay, first off, when Joe's guest says that there was like 20 people claiming to be Jesus within the period of Jesus' life,
I don't know anything about what you're talking about.
I don't think what he means is that they were claiming to be Jesus, because that honestly just wouldn't make a lot of sense. What I'm pretty sure he means is that there were multiple people who claimed to be the Christ, or in other words, the Messiah. So the point that it seems that he's trying to make is that Jesus might not have been any different than these other wannabe messiahs who were around at the time, and therefore the decision to pick Jesus as the Messiah was either arbitrary or it was without valid justification. But let's think about this claim. If he were right about this, if anything, this would only add credibility to the fact that Jesus were the true Messiah.
What?
Because think about it. If there were already like 30 people in this small area claiming to be the Messiah, at best, people would start to just roll their eyes the next time that someone came around claiming to be the Messiah.
Here I am.
It's weird. Yeah.
The more people claiming to be the Messiah, the more competition that you'd have, and the less likely people are going to be to just take your word for it. If Jesus was the only one claiming to be the Messiah, then that would make a little bit more sense. But because he wasn't, there had to be a reason that they had for believing that Jesus was the true Messiah and the others weren't. So what could that reason be? Well, thankfully, we don't have to wonder what those reasons were, since historians already know the reasons. The reasons that the first disciples and the first Christians gave for believing that Jesus was the Messiah and the other aspiring messiahs weren't was simply because Jesus was the only one that they believed fulfilled all of these Old Testament prophecies, and he was the only one that they believed that they saw physically raised from the dead after his crucifixion.
Oh, okay.
This is why even the disciples went into hiding after Jesus was killed. It was only after they believed that they saw Jesus again raised from the dead in the flesh that they became emboldened, and they were so convinced of what they saw and what they experienced that they were willing to die for it. Now, if you believe that you saw these things with your eyes and you touched the risen Jesus with your hands, those would be some pretty good reasons to go with Jesus instead of the others. I'm just saying. But anyways, let's keep it moving.
You know, I mean, there's a lot of speculation about how many different versions of that exist. Like even Thor, right? Isn't Thor like the son of Odin?
Yeah.
And isn't there like some similarities in the story of Thor to the story of Jesus?
Okay, no, there aren't. At least no similarities that are meaningful. This is one of those conspiracy claims that people like to pass around on the internet and take it to be fact, but it only works if you've never looked into it or you aren't familiar with history or scholarship. In reality, there's absolutely no credible evidence for that claim.
The problem is like these stories were all told in oral tradition for like 1,000 years before they've been written down.
If he's saying that the stories of Jesus weren't written down till like 1,000 years later, he's off by like, I don't know, a little less than about 1,000 years, but more on that in a sec.
The Gospels, I think the earliest Gospel, I'm guessing, was like Matthew. It was written like 50 years after Jesus lived.
Okay, well, at least this guy is a lot closer than Joe was on this. 50 is far closer than 1,000. I personally think that the dating of the Gospels should be far earlier, but that's a different conversation. But to get to their point, they are, however, right in stating that the Gospels were indeed passed on verbally for several years before they were written down. Now, this might sound like a slam dunk reason not to trust the Gospels until you understand why it's not. To start with Joe's claim about oral tradition, I just want to grant that their objection is completely valid when you think about it from our standpoint in our culture today and what we consider to be reliable documentation. But when we learn about other cultures, we get reminded that communication methods differ based on the needs of the culture. For example, when I was young, I had all of my family members' phone numbers memorized by heart, and it was super important to memorize their phone numbers in case I needed to call any of them.
The Stone Age is a very ancient period of human history.
But today, since we program our phone numbers into our phones, there's there's no need for me to memorize every phone number perfectly. To be honest, I don't have my twins' number memorized, and I barely even remember my wife's number. But with that in mind, think of the culture that Jesus was in. Since the Gospels originated in an oral society where most people couldn't read and write, what was important for them was to memorize large blocks of information word for word, and they would learn how to do so from a very young age. Kids were able to carefully recite large books and texts like the Iliad or the Odyssey, and it wasn't uncommon for kids to have the entire Old Testament memorized by the age of 14. And if you haven't looked at a Bible lately, this is how big the Old Testament is. Today, an adult memorizing all of this would look like a genius, but it wasn't uncommon for a 14-year-old to do so in that culture. So all of this is just to say that passing on stories verbally sounds like an unreliable means of documentation today, but it wasn't for them at that time.
Just one more thing.
And just really quick, when it comes to the time gap, if we were to grant that there was in fact a 50-year gap between the time when the first events happened and when the first gospel was written down, if we compare that to other writings in ancient history, that gap isn't as big as it might sound. Not only was a wide gap common for that time, but the gap was usually far wider. For example, two of the earliest biographies that we have for Alexander the Great were written about 500 years after Alexander's death, and historians still consider them to be trustworthy. The legends didn't come until far after that. So the time gap just isn't an issue when we're talking about reliable information in ancient history, especially given the fact that we have so many different sources and manuscripts, far more than any other work in ancient history. But let's keep going.
This is the New Testament, right? And then you got to go with the Old Testament where you're really into these stories that were an oral tradition. The New Testament is weird because like Constantine and a bunch of bishops decided
The Council of Nicaea, they just made it. They were like, hey, we're going to pick this, pick that.
This is what I think God said. I don't think God said that, bro. Let's get rid of that.
Okay, a lot's wrong here. Whenever people start talking about how the Christianity that we know today was invented at the Council of Nicaea,
bro, what are you talking about, man?
That's one of the most quoted, but also one of the most false and misleading statements that we hear today. People making these sorts of sweeping claims almost never have any idea what the council was even about. I explained more about what happened at the Council of Nicaea in my video in response to Brandon Tatum claiming that Jesus isn't God, and he said that the Trinity was invented at the Council of Nicaea. And so you can check out that video if you want a more detailed explanation of what it was about. But in response to what Joe and his guest said, no, that isn't what happened at all. To claim that at the council they just decided what went into the Bible and what didn't, that's just completely false. Wrong. In reality, the council was held to address the Arian heresy that challenged Jesus' divinity. And in the council, they didn't even discuss the biblical canon and what went into the Bible and what didn't. So that's that. Now, I hate to say it, but Joe is incredibly misinformed on the topic of the Bible and the origins of Christianity. The sad thing is, he's been making these false claims for years, and it doesn't appear that he's looked any deeper into these sorts of issues. Maybe no one has corrected him on it, or maybe some people have and he just blew him off. I don't know what the reason is, but what I do know is that this isn't the first time that Joe has been completely mistaken about Christianity. Go ahead and click on one of these.
Hold on, bro. John. You cannot end this video here without addressing a couple more things about this Joe Rogan clip. Okay, you guys click over here to see what I mean. We'll see you over there.